What if I told you the roots of one of the world's most enduring conflicts lie in three secret promises, all made during the same war, about the same land, to three different peoples? Promises not just broken, but made to be broken. During the First World War, one land became the subject of three conflicting promises. Promises made in secret, across continents, to three very different groups. Arabs, Jews, and the French, all told they had a claim to the same sacred land. But what was this land like before the storm? For centuries, Palestine was a multicultural society under Ottoman rule, home to Arab Muslims, Christian, and Jew population used to live in peace. Communities coexisted in a complex but mostly peaceful mosaic. There were no national borders, but rather identities shaped by religion, tribe, and empire. That harmony would be tested when imperial ambition collided with ancient faith. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire still controlled much of the Middle East, including Palestine, a land with deep religious significance and a complex mosaic of peoples. For centuries, the Ottomans had maintained relative stability through a decentralized system, allowing local leaders to govern under imperial oversight. But the empire was crumbling. Rising Arab nationalism, growing European interest in the region, and internal economic decline had left it vulnerable. Then came the spark, World War I. The Ottomans sided with the Central Powers. Britain, now fighting on multiple fronts, suddenly found itself facing the Ottoman threat across Egypt, Arabia, and Mesopotamia. To weaken this front and secure the post-war future of the region, Britain needed more than soldiers, it needed collaborators. Allies in the Arab world who could revolt, Jewish support in global capitals, and strategic arrangements with fellow empires like France. To achieve that, Britain made promises. Bold ones, contradictory ones, and often, secret ones. Before we dive deeper into this forgotten chapter of history, make sure to subscribe for more truth-driven documentaries that reveal what textbooks don't. Your support helps keep these stories alive. In 1915, with the war dragging on and British resources stretched thin, the empire turned to diplomacy in the shadows. They initiated secret correspondence with Sharif Hussein of Mecca, the Hashemite patriarch, spiritual leader of the Arab world, and direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. His influence among Arab tribes made him the ideal candidate to stir a regional revolt. In a series of letters exchanged with British High Commissioner Henry McMahon, Britain promised to support the creation of an independent Arab state, stretching from modern-day Syria to the Arabian Peninsula, if Hussein would lead a rebellion against the Ottoman Turks. For the British, the logic was tactical. The Ottoman Empire controlled strategic lands, including the Hijaz Railway, which supplied troops and arms. An internal Arab uprising would disrupt Ottoman lines, tie down their forces, and enable the British to advance more freely in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Britain hoped to shift the balance of the war in the east, without committing more of its own troops. Sharif Hussein, motivated by a vision of a sovereign Arab caliphate and years of Ottoman marginalization, agreed. In 1916, the Arab Revolt began. With the aid of British officers, most famously T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, Bedouin fighters captured key outposts, sabotaged railways, and spread rebellion across the desert. But beneath the collaboration lay mistrust. The McMahon letters were vague, especially when it came to Palestine. British officials carefully avoided explicitly including or excluding it from the promised Arab lands. This ambiguity wasn't an accident, it was by design. Palestine, with its religious significance and strategic location, was already on Britain's secret negotiation table with others. As Arab fighters spilled blood alongside the British, they believed they were fighting for their own nation. What they didn't know was that another promise, and another betrayal, was already in motion. Just 2 years later, in 1917, another promise was made, this time to the Jewish people. In a letter from British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild, a leader in the British Jewish community, Britain declared its support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. It became known as the Balfour Declaration, just 67 words long, but with consequences that would ripple for over a century. But what did Britain stand to gain? At the time, the Zionist movement, advocating for a Jewish return to their ancestral homeland, had gained considerable momentum, particularly in Europe and the United States. British leaders saw political opportunity. By backing the Zionist cause, they hoped to secure favor from influential Jewish communities abroad, especially in the US, where American entry into the war had become crucial, and in Russia, where revolution threatened to pull the country out of the fight entirely. Some British officials even fantasized that a Jewish-controlled Palestine might act as a reliable Western outpost in a vital region. Yet this was not a humanitarian gesture, it was cold calculation. Behind the lofty language lay imperial ambition and racial arrogance. Britain was planning to offer a homeland, not theirs to give, in a land already populated by Palestinian Arabs, who made up nearly 90% of the population at the time. And while the declaration spoke of protecting the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities, it made no mention of political rights for Arabs, implying that Jewish national aspirations were to be prioritized. Even within the British government, some officials warned of the consequences. Edwin Montagu, the only Jewish cabinet member, called the declaration anti-Semitic, arguing that it painted Jews as a separate political people and risked provoking unrest in Palestine. But Britain moved forward anyway. The Balfour Declaration was not just a promise to the Jews, it was a betrayal to the Arabs, and a geopolitical gamble disguised as moral support. Behind closed doors, yet another deal had already been made. In 1916, Britain and France secretly agreed to divide the Ottoman Middle East between them. Under the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Palestine was to be placed under international administration, with France taking modern-day Syria and Lebanon. This wasn't diplomacy, it was imperial carving. Britain wanted Iraq and access to oil, France wanted historical influence in Syria. To maintain their alliance and avoid post-war disputes, the two colonial powers drew lines in the sand, with no regard for cultural, ethnic, or religious realities on the ground. Yes, you heard it right. By 1914, it had acquired a 51% stake in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, securing critical oil supplies from Iran. But the future lay in Mesopotamia, rich in oil and strategically located. The southern regions, especially around Basra, were known for untapped reserves. British military movements and Sykes-Picot preferences reflected this priority: control the oil routes, control the empire. The arrogance of the agreement lay not only in its secrecy but in its sheer detachment from the people it affected. The architects of Sykes-Picot treated ancient communities like chess pieces on a board. It was a blueprint not for peace, but for future instability. Neither Arab nor Jewish voices were heard. The fates of millions were decided with strokes of pens in European capitals. By 1918, the Great War ended, but in the Middle East, the real battle had just begun. Britain emerged victorious and took control of Palestine, implementing what would be called the British Mandate. The Arabs, who had been promised independence, were stunned. The French marched into Syria, claiming their share under Sykes-Picot. And Jewish immigration, bolstered by the Balfour Declaration, began to grow steadily. What had been a land of shared religious heritage and coexisting communities was now a crucible of competing national claims. Tensions mounted quickly. Arabs protested what they saw as a colonial betrayal, a double cross that gave away their homeland. Demonstrations erupted into riots. Violence became more frequent. In places like Jaffa and Jerusalem, the peace that had once defined Ottoman-era coexistence started to unravel. Britain, trying to honor its conflicting promises, found itself policing a population it had never truly understood. Its officials attempted to manage both Arab discontent and Zionist ambitions, but instead of resolution, they sowed confusion and resentment. 3 promises, 3 visions, but only one land to go around. And now, that land was governed not by its people, but by a distant empire operating under a League of Nations mandate. This moment, with conflicting national dreams and colonial oversight, marked the beginning of a long and painful chapter. The seeds of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict weren't just planted. They were buried deep, watered by mistrust, and left to grow in the shadow of betrayal. The triple promises made during World War I created divisions that echo to this day. The Balfour Declaration is cited by both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian divide. Arab leaders still speak of the betrayal of Hussein. And the Sykes-Picot borders continue to shape conflict zones. Britain sought allies. It won the war. But in the process, it carved open wounds that a century later still bleed. 3 promises. 1 land. A legacy written in diplomacy, betrayal, and war. The story of how empires divide, and how people pay the price.